I'm Alina Vance, 80 years old, a woman, and at my own birthday party, my son's wife slapped me as my family cheered. But they had no idea that my late husband had already planned the perfect revenge. My story doesn't begin with the sting of that slap, though it feels like it. It begins in the soil of this garden, in the wood of these walls, in the 52 years of marriage I shared with my David under this very roof. David was a planner. He was a bricklayer by trade, but an architect by soul. He didn't just lay bricks. He saw the whole building before the first stone was ever set. He built our home with his own two hands, and he built our life with that same foresight, that same steady, deliberate care. He always said, "Eliner, you have to build on a foundation of rock, not sand. That goes for houses and it goes for people." I suppose he knew, long before I did, that our own son Marcus was building his life on sand. Marcus was our only child, our pride and joy. When he was a boy, he was the sun in our sky. He had David's smile in my eyes, but as he grew, a different hunger grew in him. It wasn't for love or for legacy, but for things. He didn't want to build, he wanted to buy. He didn't see the value in the work, he only saw the price tag. David saw it first. I remember one evening, Marcus was about 16, and he came home fuming because his friend got a brand new car for his birthday, while we had only given him David's meticulously restored, but still 10-year-old sedan. "It's not fair," he'd shouted, slamming the door. "We're not poor, why do we have to live like we are?" David sat him down at this very kitchen table. He was calm, as he always was. "Son," he said, his voice low and even, "there's a difference between being rich and living richly. That car your friend has will be rust in a decade. What we have, what we are building, is meant to last." Marcus didn't understand. He just saw what he didn't have. He saw his father's wisdom as a weakness, his prudence as a punishment. I defended him, of course. "He's just a boy, David," I'd say. "He'll learn." David would just look at me with those knowing, sad eyes and say, "I pray you're right, Aliner." Then came Cynthia. Marcus met her in college, and she was like gasoline poured on the little flame of his greed. She came from a family with new money and no grace. To her, our home wasn't a sanctuary, it was an asset. It wasn't filled with memories, it was filled with outdated furniture. From the beginning, she treated me with a kind of patronizing disdain, as if I were a relic to be tolerated. The first time she visited, she ran her finger along my beautiful mahogany dining table, a wedding gift from my parents. "This is quaint," she'd said, the word dripping with condescension. "You know, Marcus, a glass top would really modernize this space." I saw the look on David's face, a flicker of profound disappointment. He knew then, I think, that the son he had raised was lost to the man she was shaping. Their son, my grandson Jamal, was the final masterpiece of their philosophy. He was raised with everything he ever wanted and nothing he ever needed. He had no chores, no responsibilities, and no concept of respect. He called me a leaner, not grandma, at his mother's insistence. "We don't want him thinking of you as some old woman," Cynthia had explained with a tight smile, as if age were a contagious disease. When he was a teenager, I once asked him to help me bring in the groceries from the car. He looked up from his phone, a screen that cost more than my first car, and said, "Can't you get them delivered or something?" Marcus was standing right there and just chuckled, ruffling Jamal's hair. "The boy's got a point, Mom. It's the 21st century." The sting of that dismissal was a precursor, a small tremor before the earthquake. That was their way, Marcus the passive enabler, Cynthia the active aggressor, and Jamal the cruel echo. They were a united front of entitlement, and I, the foolish matriarch, kept telling myself it was a phase, that one day they would see the foundation of rock I was standing on and come home. I never imagined they would try to dynamite it from under my feet. The week leading up to my 80th birthday was a flurry of activity that felt both wonderful and hollow. Cynthia had insisted on planning it. "You can't turn 80 without a proper bash, Aliner," she'd chirped a month ago, her tone leaving no room for argument. I knew her motives were not born of love. For Cynthia, a party wasn't a celebration, it was a performance. It was a chance to showcase her husband's family home, to invite her influential friends, and to play the part of the devoted daughter-in-law. I agreed, partly because arguing was exhausting, but mostly because a small, hopeful part of me believed that maybe, just maybe, this milestone would be a moment of genuine connection. The house buzzed with caterers and florists she had hired. Strangers were errant. jing my life into neat, aesthetically pleasing vignettes. They pushed my comfortable, worn armchair, the one David died in peacefully while reading his Bible, into a corner to make room for a champagne fountain. They replaced the family photos on the mantelpiece with sterile, artful displays of calla lilies. With every change, a piece of my soul felt displaced. "Isn't it fabulous?" Cynthia asked, sweeping into the living room 2 days before the party. She was wearing a crisp white pantsuit, looking more like a real estate agent staging a home for sale than a daughter planning a birthday. "It's a lot, Cynthia," I said, looking at the alien landscape my home had become. "Oh, Alina, don't be so modest. We have to make an impression. The Hendersons are coming, and you know he's on the board at the country club." She straightened a lily with a possessive air. "This house has such potential. It just needs to be brought into the modern age." There it was again, that familiar refrain. For the last 5 years, ever since David passed, the campaign had been relentless. It started with hints, then suggestions, then outright demands. "Mom, the upkeep on this place is a fortune. Think of the freedom you'd have in a nice condo. This land is worth a mint, Mom. We could all be comfortable for life." They didn't see the hand-carved details on the banister that David spent a month perfecting. They didn't smell the phantom scent of his pipe tobacco that still clung to the study curtains. They saw square footage and property values. The day before the party, Marcus came by alone. It was a rare occurrence. He found me in the garden tending to my roses. "David planted this rose garden for me on our 10th anniversary. Each bush was a memory." "Mom," he began, his voice trying for a gentleness that didn't fit him anymore. "Cynthia is just excited. You know how she is." "I know exactly how she is, Marcus," I said, not looking up from a wilting bloom. He sighed, the sound of a man burdened by a difficult task. "We need to talk about this, Mom, seriously. After the party, we have an offer, a really good one. A developer wants to put up luxury townhouses. It's a life-changing amount of money." "And where would I live?" I asked, finally meeting his gaze. "We've been over this. We'd find you the most beautiful apartment. Top floor concierge, no stairs, no garden to worry about. You'd be safe and sound." "I am safe and sound, Marcus. I am home." My voice was firm, filled with a finality that I hoped he would understand. "This conversation is over. My home is not for sale, not tomorrow, not ever. This was your father's legacy, and it is my sanctuary. Can you, for one day, for my 80th birthday, just respect that?" He looked away, his jaw tightening. He kicked at a loose stone on the path. "Fine, Mom, fine, we'll talk later." But the look in his eyes wasn't one of concession, it was one of frustration, like a general plotting a new line of attack after a failed skirmish. I knew then that the party was not a truce. It was the main battlefield, and I had just been given the terms of my surrender. As I watched my only son walk away, his shoulders tense with resentment, the hope I'd been clinging to finally withered and died, just like the bloom in my hand. The day of the party arrived, painted in the brilliant, deceitful hues of a perfect southern afternoon. The sun streamed through the large bay windows, glinting off the champagne fountain and the crystal vases of lilies. The house was filled with the murmur of polite conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the scent of expensive perfume mingling with catered hors d'oeuvres. I sat in a large, throne-like chair Cynthia had rented for the occasion, feeling like a museum piece in my own home. I wore a navy blue dress, the one David always said made my eyes look like the midnight sky. One by one, friends and neighbors came to offer their well wishes, their genuine affection a warm balm on my anxious heart. But my eyes kept drifting to the trio across the room, Marcus, Cynthia, and Jamal. They moved through the crowd like sharks, smiling, shaking hands, accepting compliments on a home they were actively trying to destroy. Cynthia was in her element, her laughter a little too loud, her gestures a little too grand. Marcus stood beside her, his smile fixed, while Jamal lounged against a wall, scrolling on his phone, the picture of bored, youthful arrogance. An hour into the festivities, Cynthia tapped a glass for attention. "A toast," she announced, "to the woman of the hour, my wonderful mother-in-law, Alina." A smattering of polite applause filled the room. She raised her glass. 80 years, an incredible milestone, and what a life she has built. This house, this beautiful, magnificent house, is a testament to her and David's hard work. I felt a cold dread snake up my spine. This was it. And as we look to the future, she continued, her voice taking on a syrupy persuasive tone, we want to ensure that Aliner's next chapter is one of ease and luxury, free from the burdens of maintaining such a large property. So we are also thrilled to announce that we are in the process of helping her transition to a new, more modern home so she can truly enjoy her golden years. A confused silence fell over the room. My friends, my neighbors, they knew my love for this house. They looked from Cynthia's beaming face to my stunned one. I could feel the blood drain from my face. She had done it. She had announced my surrender before I had even waved a white flag. I stood up, my legs trembling but my voice steady. Cynthia, I said, my voice cutting through the silence, I believe there has been a misunderstanding. Every eye was on me. My home is not for sale. I will be living here as I always have for the rest of my days. Cynthia's smile froze, then cracked. A dark flush crept up her neck. She took a step toward me, her voice a venomous whisper for my ears only. Don't you dare embarrass me, you stubborn old woman. We are doing this for you. No, I said, my voice gaining strength. You are doing this for you, and the answer is no. And then it happened. Her face contorted in a mask of pure fury. Before I could even register her intent, her hand flew up and a sharp, cracking sound echoed through the suddenly silent room. Her palm connected with my cheek with a force that snapped my head to the side. A collective gasp rippled through the 55 guests. The sting was instant and hot, but it was nothing compared to the fiery blaze of humiliation that engulfed me. For a moment, the world stopped. In that frozen sliver of time, I looked past Cynthia. My gaze found Jamal. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't horrified. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face, and he brought his hands together in a single, mocking clap. The sound was as sharp as the slap itself. Then my eyes darted to my son, my only child, Marcus. He was standing by the mantelpiece, his hand on a glass of whiskey. He wasn't rushing to my side. He wasn't admonishing his wife. He just stood there, a strange, satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He caught my eye, lifted his glass in a tiny, almost imperceptible gesture, and mouthed the words, "Serves you right." The world came crashing back in. The murmurs erupted into a cacophony of disbelief. My friends started to move toward me, their faces masks of concern and outrage, but I didn't see them. I only saw my family, the three people who were supposed to be my foundation, revealing themselves to be the sand, the sinkhole, the dynamite. The physical pain in my cheek was already fading, but the wound they had carved into my heart in that single, public, horrific moment was one I knew would never truly heal. The party disintegrated not with a bang, but with a slow, agonizing hiss. Guests fled as if escaping a toxic gas leak, their faces a mixture of pity and horror. They offered hurried goodbyes and averted gazes, not knowing what to say, their kindness only serving to deepen my shame. Cynthia, realizing the magnitude of her social blunder, was trying to salvage the situation, fluttering around with frantic false apologies. A family disagreement. My mother-in-law is just a bit confused sometimes. Marcus had steered her away, hissing instructions in her ear, his face a mask of cold fury not for what she did to me, but for the mess she had created. Within 30 minutes, the house was empty. The silence they left behind was louder than the slap. It was a screaming, cavernous silence filled with the ghosts of laughter from moments before. The champagne fountain gurgled mockingly in the corner. The scent of lilies was suddenly cloying, funereal. I stood alone in the center of the living room, one hand instinctively pressed against my still throbbing cheek. I didn't cry. The shock was too deep, the betrayal too absolute for tears. It was a cold, hard knot in the pit of my stomach. Slowly, as if in a trance, I began to walk through the house. My home, their asset. I walked into the dining room and ran my hand over the mahogany table Cynthia had called quaint. I remembered polishing it with my mother as a young bride, David smiling from the doorway. I drifted into the study, the scent of old books and David's pipe tobacco a comforting phantom. I touched the worn leather of his reading chair, the place where he'd read stories to a young Marcus, a boy with wonder in his eyes, not the cold calculation I saw today. Every object was a memory, every room a chapter of my life. This was the house where I had brought my baby home from the hospital. This was the house where David and I had danced in the kitchen on our 25th anniversary. This was the house where I had nursed him through his final illness, holding his hand until the very end. And in this house, I had just been assaulted and disowned by the family that was supposed to be his greatest legacy. Although we. Height of it all finally hit me as I climbed the stairs to our bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed we had shared for 5 decades, and looked at my reflection in the vanity mirror. I saw an old woman, not the matriarch, not the dignified Eleanor Vance, just a frail 80-year-old woman with a red mark on her cheek and a universe of pain in her eyes, the smirk on my son's face, the clap from my grandson. Those were the things that truly broke me. The slap was a momentary violence, but their reactions were a declaration of my worthlessness to them. I was an obstacle, an inconvenience, a stubborn old woman standing in the way of their desires. I lay down on the bed, pulling David's old, heavy quilt over me, and the tears finally came. They were not hot, angry tears, but cold, silent tears of profound grief. I wept for my husband, who was not here to defend me. I wept for the son I had lost years ago and had been too blind to admit it. I wept for the grandson who had learned contempt instead of compassion. And I wept for myself, for the utter, crushing loneliness that had just become my new reality. The house was no longer a sanctuary. It felt like a tomb, a monument to a life that had been desecrated. In the dark, silent house, surrounded by the debris of my own birthday party, I felt a despair so complete, so final, that I thought it might swallow me whole. I don't know how long I lay there, adrift in that sea of sorrow. The moon climbed the sky, casting long, skeletal shadows across the bedroom floor. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Cynthia's furious face, heard Jamal's cruel clap, felt the phantom sting on my cheek. But most of all, I saw Marcus's smirk. That smirk was the executioner's nod. Sometime in the deepest, darkest hour of the night, when the world is at its most still, a different memory surfaced, cutting through the fog of my despair. It was from the year before David passed. We were in the garden, and he was unusually quiet. He'd been watching Marcus, who had come by to ask for a loan to cover a bad investment, the third such request that year. After Marcus left, pockets full and conscience clear, David turned to me. His face was etched with a sadness that seemed to age him a decade in an instant. "Eleanor," he'd said, taking my hands in his. His were rough and calloused, but they were always so gentle with me. "I need you to promise me something." Anything, David," I had said. "I have made provisions for you, for this house. I have built fortifications, my love, just like the ones we put in our foundation. Marcus is a good man at his core, but he is weak, and his wife, she is not. If the day ever comes when you feel they are trying to push you out, when you feel backed into a corner, I need you to call Samuel. Don't argue with them. Don't fight them on their terms. Just call Samuel Jones. Promise me." "David, don't talk like that," I'd pleaded. He would never. "Promise me, Eleanor," he'd insisted, his gaze locking with mine, full of fierce, protective love. "Samuel has the blueprints. He'll know what to do." I had promised, of course, though I never truly believed I would need to keep it. Now, lying in the wreckage of my 80th birthday, David's words came back to me not as a sad memory, but as a lifeline, a plan, a blueprint for war. The despair didn't vanish, but something new began to burn alongside it, a cold, hard ember of resolve. I was not just a victim, I was Eleanor Vance. I was the wife of David Vance, the man who built on rock. As the first pale light of dawn began to filter through the blinds, I got up. I washed my face, the cold water a shock to my senses. The red mark on my cheek had faded to a dull, purple bruise, an ugly testament to the day before. I looked at my reflection again. This time, I didn't see a frail old woman, I saw a soldier. I found Samuel Jones's number in David's old address book. My hand was steady as I dialed. He answered on the second ring, his voice gravelly with sleep. "Samuel Jones." "Samuel," I said, my own voice clear and devoid of tears. "It's Eleanor Vance." There was a pause. "Eleanor, are you all right? It's 6 in the morning." "No, Samuel, I am not all right," I said. "But I am ready. David told me to call you. He said you have the blueprints." The sleepiness in his voice vanished, replaced by a sharp, alert focus. I heard him sit up, the rustle of sheets in the background. "Eleanor, what happened?" I told him everything. The party, the public announcement, the slap, the clap, the smirk. I recounted it all in a flat, emotionless tone, like a witness giving testimony. With each word, I felt the shame recede and the anger solidify into something useful, something strong. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. For a moment, I feared he would offer pity, but Samuel was not a man for pity. He was a man of action, just like David. Oh, that vulture, he finally growled, and I knew he meant Cynthia, and Marcus just let it happen. It wasn't a question. David saw this coming, Alina. He prayed he was wrong, but he was too smart to rely on prayer alone. He built a fortress, and he gave me the keys. Yes, Alina, I have the blueprints. Let's go to work. For the first time in 12 hours, a sliver of light pierced my darkness. It wasn't the light of forgiveness or hope for reconciliation. It was the cold, sharp light of a surgeon's lamp. It was time to cut out the rods. My meeting with Samuel the next day was not in his sterile downtown office, but at my kitchen table. It felt right. This was where the war was to be planned, in the heart of the territory I was defending. Samuel arrived with a worn leather briefcase, his face set in a grim, determined expression that mirrored my own. He looked around the room, at the lingering scent of lilies and the indentation in the carpet where the champagne fountain had stood. They really did a number on you, Alina," he said softly. They did, I replied. Now we do a number on thems. He smiled, a rare, sharp thing. That's the Alina I know. He opened his briefcase and laid out a series of folders. David was a genius, he began, his voice filled with admiration for his old friend. He didn't just have a will, he had a strategy. The plan had 3 pillars, 3 fortifications, as David had called them. Pillar 1 was the trust fund. David had left Marcus a substantial trust, but it wasn't unconditional. He had installed Samuel as the co-trustee with oversight powers that Marcus had always believed were just a formality. One of the clauses, buried deep in the legal jargon, stipulated that the trust was subject to a full financial audit if the co-trustee suspected financial malfeasance or familial coercion against the primary benefactor, which was me. Marcus has been using the quarterly disbursements to secure loans for his and Cynthia's extravagant lifestyle, Samuel explained, tapping a bank statement. He's leveraged against future earnings he isn't even guaranteed. Your testimony about the events at the party is more than enough to trigger the audit clause. The moment I make the call, their accounts will be frozen pending investigation. His river of money will dry up overnight. My first instinct was a maternal pang to cut off my son, but then I remembered his smirk. Make the call, I said. Pillar 2 was the house itself. David knew this place was the grand prize for them, Samuel continued, so he made it a prize they could never claim. Years ago, David had quietly begun the process of documenting the house's history. It was one of the first homes built in this neighborhood after the war, built with specific post-war techniques and materials that were now rare. He had compiled letters, original blueprints, and photographs. He'd done all the legwork for a historical landmark designation, but had never filed the final papers. He left that for you, Samuel said, sliding a thick file across the table. It's the final arrow in the quiver. Once we file this with the city's Preservation Society, this house can't be significantly altered, let alone demolished. Its value as a teardown becomes 0. It was brilliant. It turned their greatest asset into their greatest liability. Pillar 3 was the most devastating. It was a single codicil in David's will, a final, secret testament. It stated that if Marcus or any agent acting on his behalf ever took any action, legal or otherwise, to attempt to force the sale of the family home against my wishes, his entire inheritance, including the now frozen trust, would be immediately and irrevocably redirected. Half would go to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and the other half would go to a scholarship for underprivileged architecture students at the local university. David called it the Scorched Earth Protocol, Samuel said, a grim look on his face. He hoped to God you'd never have to use it, but their stunt at the party, Cynthia's public announcement, that was the action, they've already triggered it, all we have to do is file the paperwork. One by one, we made the calls, we sent the faxes, we filed the papers. With each action, I felt a layer of my victimhood sloughing off. I was not the frail old woman cowering in her bedroom. I was David Vance's wife, the executor of his will, the defender of his legacy. The first ripple came 2 days later. My phone rang and the caller ID showed Marcus's name. I let it go to voicemail. He called again and again. Finally, a text message appeared. Mom, call me. Something is wrong with the accounts. The bank won't tell me anything. It's urgent. I read the message, took a calm sip of my tea, and deleted it. The river was drying up. The fortress walls were rising, and I was safe inside, waiting for the inevitable siege. They came 3 days after that first panicked text message. A furious banging on the front door shattered the afternoon calm. I wasn't startled. I had been expecting them. Samuel was with me, sitting in David's armchair, a folder resting on his lap. I had asked him to be there. This was his battle, too. I opened the door. Marcus, Cynthia, and Jamal stood on my porch, their faces a thunderous portrait of rage and confusion. Cynthia, for once, was speechless, her face pale. Marcus looked haggard, his usual polished veneer stripped away to reveal the panicked, weak man underneath. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" he demanded, pushing past me into the foyer. "Our accounts are frozen. The bank is talking about an audit. They're saying I committed fraud." "Did you?" I asked calmly, closing the door behind them. "That's not the point," Cynthia shrieked, finding her voice. "This is because of you. You did this." "Please lower your voice in my home," I said, my tone as cold and hard as steel. "You've caused enough of a scene here for one lifetime." They saw Samuel then. His presence seemed to suck the air out of the room. "What is he doing here?" Jamal sneered, gesturing at Samuel with his chin. "You calling your lawyer grandma?" The way he said grandma was an insult, a mocking imitation of the respect he had never shown. "Mr. Jones is here as the co-trustee of your father's estate, Marcus," I said, ignoring Jamal completely. "And as my legal counsel, I suggest you listen to what he has to say." All eyes turned to Samuel. He leaned forward, placing the folder on the coffee table. "Marcus, Cynthia," he began, his voice the epitome of legal authority. "On Tuesday, acting on information provided by a leaner concerning an attempt at familial coercion, I initiated a full audit of the Vance family trust as per the powers granted to me in the trust's founding document. All assets are frozen pending the outcome of that investigation." Marcus staggered back as if he'd been physically struck. "Coercion? That's ridiculous. We were trying to help her." "Slapping an 80-year-old woman in front of 55 witnesses is a strange way of helping," Samuel said dryly. "And that brings me to point two." He slid a document out of the folder. It was a letter from the City Historical Preservation Society. "As of yesterday, this house and property have been granted preliminary landmark status. A permanent designation is pending a final vote, which is a mere formality. This property can no longer be sold to a developer." "Oh, it is protected." Cynthia let out a sound like a deflating balloon. The dream of luxury townhouses, of country club memberships, of a life funded by the destruction of this home vanished before her eyes. "You can't do that," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "It's our money, it's our inheritance." "Actually, it's not," Samuel said, delivering the final, killing blow. He pulled out one last document. "This is a codicil to your father's will, Marcus, a scorched earth protocol, as he called it. It states that any attempt by you or your agents to force a sale of this house against alieners will result in your complete and total disinheritance. Your public declaration at the party was the trigger. As of this morning, all legal filings have been made. The Vance Trust and all associated assets are in the process of being liquidated and transferred. Half to the NAACP, half to a scholarship fund in your father's name." Silence, complete, utter, world-ending silence. The color drained from Marcus's face. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. He wasn't just broke, he was disowned by a dead man. His own father had reached out from the grave to deliver the final judgment. "Why," he finally whispered, his voice cracking, "I'm your son." I looked at him, at the boy I had raised and the man he had become, and for the first time I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even pity. Just a vast, empty space where a mother's love used to be. "My son would not have smirked while his wife assaulted his mother," I said, my voice quiet but unshakable. "My son would not have stood by while his own child mocked her. My son respected his father and the legacy he built. I don't know who you are, Marcus, but you are not that son. I stood up and walked to the door, opening it wide. I believe your business here is concluded. They stared at me, their world collapsed around them. There were no more threats, no more demands, there was nothing left. Defeated, they turned and shuffled out the door, a family broken not by my actions, but by their own greed. I watched them go, then closed the door, the click of the latch sounding final and absolute. The house was quiet again, but this time it wasn't an empty, screaming silence, it was peace. It was the sound of my foundation, built on rock, finally settling and secure. In the end, my husband gave me one last gift. Not money, not a house, but a choice. The choice to defend my dignity. I learned that a home is not juice. Walls and a roof, it's a fortress for the soul. And family is not just blood, it's the people who rush to defend that fortress, not lay siege to it. My son and his family built their lives on sand, and when the tide of their own making came in, their world washed away. I am still here on my rock in the house that love built, and I am finally at peace. And that's my story. Thank you for listening.